Thank you so much for joining us, those of you that are watching. I'm going to get started with just doing a little bit of an introduction, tell you a little bit about Rise Up For You, and then we are going to jump into the conversation because it's an important one and we want to make sure that we utilize that time effectively. My name is Netta. I'm the founder of Rise Up For You. I'm your host for today. For those of you that are unfamiliar, Rise Up For You is an education and motivational company that works with companies to enhance their company culture as well as develop individuals personally and professionally. Our main competency and expertise is in soft skills development. And so we really work with individuals and companies to build the people, communication, emotional intelligence skills that we need. Very, very excited to have this conversation and very honored and grateful to have our panelists today. I see that Mary just got kicked off, but she'll be joining us here any second. I just want to say thank you because this is a conversation that takes a lot of courage. And I'm honored that you guys have accepted the invite to come on and have, these conversations about the racial injustice that's happening today. So I want to start off by saying that I'm a little bit nervous, and that's okay. And I'm telling you that because this is a topic that does make people nervous. And I know that many of you guys that are watching this panel webinar today are joining this conversation because you also feel a little bit of fear or nervousness around the things that are going on. And we're not quite sure how to have these difficult conversations. And Rise Up For You is an advocate for humanity, an advocate for diversity and inclusion. And we wanted to bring this to the forefront to educate and really understand how we can have this conversation. So again, I'm honored to have Ari Friedman here with Walt Disney, Greg Friesen with the Anaheim Police Department, and Mary Hempel will be jumping back on hopefully soon. And she's with the Limitless Leader, and she also does statewide education for North Carolina. So as you can see, there's Mary, we got you back. So as you can see, I purposely and strategically brought on 3 people from 3 different industries: the education, leadership industry, corporation, obviously we're all familiar with, and the law enforcement. And I did that because I strongly believe that in order to have these difficult conversations, we need to be in every industry and we really need to tackle it 360. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, I want to thank the panelists for joining us today, for saying yes to being on this panel, for having the courage to have your voice be heard even during these difficult times. I do want to let our attendees know that we will be taking Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, you will have the opportunity to say them yourself. So I will unmute you and I will allow you to speak, and that way you can ask the question to our panelists, and we will do that towards the end. So we're gonna go ahead and jump in, and I would love to start just by throwing the ball in your court and giving each of you a minute or less just to tell us about yourself and introduce yourself in your own words. So we're gonna go ahead and start with Ari because you are who I see first. So Ari, go ahead and tell us about yourself and what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Nada. So I'm Ari. I'm with the Walt Disney Company. Currently, I'm with professional recruitment under Disney Park Experience Products. I'm also the co-chair of Salute, which is one of our business employee resource groups, and very involved with the diversity and inclusion initiatives at the Walt Disney Company, locally in Anaheim, as well in the greater Southern California area. I'm also currently in the Navy Reserve, and I'm glad to be on this call. We just, before all COVID-19, we had a whole week-long Belong Summit talking about these topics here, and we'll definitely go into that further today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ari. Next on my screen, I see Craig with the Anaheim Police Department. Craig, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the great work you do.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Craig Friesen. I'm a police captain with the Anaheim Police Department in Anaheim, California, home of Disneyland. I am a captain in charge of our administration division, which encompasses our internal affairs, major incident review, personnel training, budget, finance, and I'm also our department's representative for our Citizen Police Review Board and the liaison between the department and the Office of Independent Review. So I'm excited to be here today and listen and learn from everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Craig. And lastly, we have Mary calling in from North Carolina. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Thank you so much, Netta. It's an honor and pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon here on the East Coast. I am Dr. Mary Hemphill. I'm the leader and founder and CEO of the Limitless Leader program and the Limitless Lady LLC, where we help communities get better, where we help individuals become better so that they can better serve their community and their personal career. I am also the state's first computer science and tech education director in the state's history. So I have been tasked with making sure that K through 12, our technology and our computer science initiatives have been elevated across the state. And then last but not least, I'm the co-founder for Rebrand North Carolina Education, where we work to shatter the status quo in education by taking innovation and personal responsibility to educating our students to a higher level.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. So as you can see, everyone that's watching, we have an amazing lineup and panelists, and very, very diverse in industry and thought. So very, very honored again to have you guys. So let's jump in. Let's start with the idea of conversations. One of the reasons why I wanted to have this webinar and bring you guys on is because friends, clients, people out in the community don't know where to start with the conversation, okay? And sometimes we don't know where to start, we don't have a conversation at all. And we know that that's not the right way to go about some of the things that are happening in regards to injustice throughout the US. We know that racial injustice has really come to a forefront with George Floyd, but it's been happening before that. Within the last 2 weeks with Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor within the last few months, and many more before that. And now it's come to a head where we can have these conversations consciously and responsibly. And we want to empower companies, individuals, and communities to do that the right way. So, there's a fear that something wrong is going to be said, right? We see it on social media. We see it with companies that are afraid to put out an email or branding that something might be said and be taken the wrong way. And so what do we need to do, or what do we need to know before we even have the conversation? Because I'm a huge advocate that before we open our mouth, before we put anything out in writing, that there needs to be work done before that. Right? Whether that's educating yourself, learning what's really going on, having conversations behind closed doors to understand. In your professional opinion, and just being boots on the ground, what do you think needs to happen before that conversation starts? And I'd be happy to start with Ari.
There we go. Perfect. So I think it's the biggest thing, especially kind of putting on the corporate hat, is get with your corporate allies, people that within your network or group at, for example, at Disney, we have the Business Employee Resource Group. For our Belong Summit, to begin this conversation, we started planning 6 to 8 months in advance, getting together, talking about topics we wanted to do. We did think tanks, we did our research and so forth. But we also created elements in advance of creating a safe place, knowing, like you said, mistakes are going to happen. Conversations are going to happen. We want it real and authentic. If you don't have that real authenticity and that organic growth in your conversation, you're not going to get anywhere. People are going to get hurt. You're going to cry. It's going to get emotional, but that's how the change begins to happen, especially in corporate. So Disney, we're trying to be that leader. We focus on our cast. We even divided up our conversation to have a salary focus and then also an hourly focus, purposely giving the information to our cast for the right audience. The topics were the same, but for example, when having a conversation with an hourly person for how do you bring your best self to work, you can't always work from home. Salary cast members have that opportunity. So we wanted to make sure when we're giving our contact out and our unconscious bias, for example, too, how do we create that? So with our hourly focus, we focus on their guest interactions. For the salary focus, we focus more on how do you hire someone and how do you have an unconscious bias in hiring, creating talent pipelines. But again, we set that from the beginning. We set the stage up front. So when it came to finally putting on our summit, everyone understood, everyone knew they can feel safe and they can have these conversations. We had breakout sessions afterwards as well, and the conversations were endless. And I think the biggest thing too is empowering people to step up. Giving people the microphone that normally wouldn't get the microphone either is huge, to make sure everyone has a voice in the room.
Thank you, Ari. And I love that response. And I love that you're calling out that it's going to be uncomfortable, right? And the sooner we can get comfortable with the fact that it's going to be uncomfortable, right, the better for all of us, right? And still pushing through that uncomfortableness, because the more we do it, the more comfortable we have. But what I really hear you saying as well is creating psychological safety before the conversation begins, so that people feel like they can have part in that conversation. Thank you, Ari. Craig, I'd love to pass it over to you. what are some of your thoughts in regards to doing the pre-work before jumping into the conversation?
My generation, I have two college age. My wife and I spoke and said, it's probably a good idea that we get Snapchat accounts because our kids really don't answer our phone calls anymore, right? But they will answer a Snapchat message. I don't understand why that happens, but if I call them, they won't answer. But if I Snapchat them, I get an instant response. And we see that within the workforce now. I come from a generation that if we had a problem in a neighborhood, I would go to that neighborhood, get out and talk to the people that live in that neighborhood and have conversations, right? Because to me, face-to-face conversations are always best because there's no tone in an email. There's no tone in a text, right? And everything can be misconstrued. And people want information now in 150 characters or less. And life doesn't happen in 150 characters or less. And I think what we're seeing both in the public and definitely within our department now is people aren't really seeking information. They're seeking affirmation, right, on their own personal views and their own personal opinions. And that's not going to lead to change either within our community or within our department. So we're encouraging our officers that you need to get out of your cars, you need to talk to people. And sometimes you need to just shut up and listen, right? You need to hear a different side, because if you're only looking for points on Twitter or points on Instagram that affirm what you already believe in, you're not going to grow as a person, and then therefore our organization and our department isn't going to grow. So it's a new way of thinking for the older guys and girls in our department, and it's kind of setting that tone and culture for this is the way we're going to move forward for the young officers that we've hired. Thank
you so much. And what I took from that is really being inclusive, right? And listening to everyone and hearing everyone. And it's interesting because years ago with our great philosophers, that was what they did, right? They went back and forth, they debated, and that was part of life, and that's how they grew. And I think you're absolutely right, Craig, is that today sometimes we can get caught in the, this is my opinion, and you must like and agree with my opinion. And if we're all sitting around like-minded people constantly, then you're absolutely right. We're not going to be able to grow. We're not going to be able to have diversity in how we think and what we do. And so thank you for pointing that out. That's great. So far, Ari and Craig, you have different thoughts, and I love that because both of them are so needed. Mary, I'm going to pass that to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Netta. And I love that you talked about and that Ari talked about psychological safety, because what we have to remember is that this historical occurrence has happened on the heels of an already strenuous global occurrence. So we know that mental health, PTSD, depression, all of those things that surround our human race in terms of mental health was already at an all-time high. And so never at a time in our history can I think of a time when the quote, please approach everyone with a smile and your authenticity, for you know not what they're going through, has ever been more probable or been more applicable, because we do not. The Black and Brown community were tired pre-COVID. So going into this has further exacerbated those issues of fear. And so when they talk about fear, you're approaching and talking about things that require education. If I'm scared of heights, if I'm scared of dogs, if I'm scared of a test, there are things that I can do to prepare myself. But we're not talking about heights, and we're not talking about tests, and we're not talking about dogs. We're talking about fear of the human race. So in order to approach every conversation with authenticity, in order to approach every conversation with transparency and saying, I want to know more so that I can walk alongside you, so that I can learn something from you, it's important that we address that fear that we all have right now about simply being humans. And in order to do that, that does mean doing your pre-work. I hear a lot of people asking the question, are you okay? The answer is unequivocally, no, I am not okay. But there are other questions that you can ask, that you can prepare, that if you have to write them on a Post-it note or practice them in the mirror, that really center around self-care, so we can put sort of this bubble around our mental health. Have you eaten today? Is there something that I can do to help you with a project? What can I do to support you? Is there something you want to know about me that will help your journey right now during this time? Just simply asking, are you okay, is a closed, fixed question that has a yes or no answer. but to move into that deeper level of how can I help you with your mental health? How can I help you as a human? How can I help you in the job that we all have to do right now to anchor ourselves? That requires getting an arsenal of questions that engage conversation and not simply say yes, no, hi, how are you? We have to move past that if we want to see growth during this time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Conversations that really matter, right? Besides the yes, no, absolutely. You're totally right. So I want to, when we are ready to have that conversation, let's talk specifically in regards to companies, okay? What are some tips that you have to help conversations within a company? I'm going to be honest with you. In the last 2 weeks, I've gotten a number of emails from companies about everything that's happening with injustice across the US. And then I've gotten another email after that that said, we apologize, for misstating, or, if they said something that was offensive. And so I'm seeing this pattern of companies putting out an email and then something on the back end happening where maybe they're getting, comments from other community members, and then they put out another statement of apology. And I think that there's a number of companies, again, that are dealing with this, that also is creating a little bit of fear of, I'm just not going to say anything because I don't want to offend anyone. And we know that that's not the answer, right? And we have quite a few people that are watching today that are a part of a company that are probably really trying to figure out, hey, I want to be responsible. We want our company to be socially responsible, but I just need more guidance on how to do it the right way. Now, I'm not sure there's ever going to be a right way. I'm not sure there's ever going to be a win-win, because obviously racial injustice is an emotional thing, right? Even, some of the other challenges that we've had in society the past few years, it's emotional. So what are some tips that you have to have the conversation in the right way, or is there even a right way? So I'm just going to leave that open for you guys, and I'm actually going to go back the other way. So let's start with Mary on this.
All right. Netta, you're absolutely right. I think we've all been inundated with emails and messages and videos from companies that are saying, this is our stand on the social injustice. This is our stand of solidarity in terms of what we're going to do. And those are nice. But what we have to do during this time, and companies have to understand, is there needs to be less lip service and more boots on the ground. So in order for companies to move forward as a win-win, you have to take the people with you. And that means not only sending your emails and messages and videos of solidarity, but we want to know, what is the action plan? What are the actionable steps that you are going to take in order to make sure that you're starting the conversation, but that vision has feet? What are the feet, and how is that going to happen later? I always suggest that companies create SMART goals. When those goals are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely, put those out there within your communications, because that does two things. It increases your level of transparency in saying, this is what we are willing to do. We're not just going to have dialogue circles. We're going to have dialogue circles this month. We're going to come back and we're going to revisit it in 6 weeks. If we haven't reached our goal, we're going to revisit it in another 2 weeks. And if the employees are comfortable with it, these are the people who are represented on this team. Because the second thing, along with transparency, is accountability. I want to be able to go to Ari and say, Ari, tell me about that meeting. I know you got chosen for the diversity and inclusion meeting. What was it about? And then Ari is going to be able to elevate my voice. Because when you start thinking about retention, when you start thinking about actionable items where you're involving people of color, the voices have to be there, but also taking action on those voices is important. So this is not just going to mean that right now, since it happened 2 weeks ago, you're flooding people with inner office memos and you're having these conversations. I want to know 6 months down the line, where did this work breadcrumb to? Did you get the intended outcome? And how can I hold you as an accountable for that? Whether I'm a mid-level manager, the CEO, or whether I'm a custodian within the company. Be transparent on all levels, make it specific, make it attainable, and then hold me accountable for it in the end.
I love that. And I love that anyone that's listening right now, you really give the first action step. Sit down and create an action plan, right? So, and that can be, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but that can be education, right? That there's so many ways that you can go about the action plan and what you can put in it to involve your team. Thank you for that. Craig, I'm going to go over to you. Same question. What are some tips that you have?
Well, I started at 19 in law enforcement. I was born and raised in the city of Inglewood. I became a cadet with the Inglewood Police Department at age 19. And to say that transparency was a tenet of the law enforcement career when I first started is not the truth, right? It is something that this profession has struggled with. And I'm happy to say that my department has made it a tenet for what we stand for and what we believe in. A lot of that in the past has been, there would be a crime scene and there'd be cops and firemen all over the place, and people would come up from the neighborhood and ask, hey, what happened? And the cop response would be, oh, nothing to see here, right? That doesn't build trust and relationships within the community. Recently, the state passed SB 1421, which allows and mandates departments to release body-worn camera audio and video footage for critical incidents. Our department has kind of gone all in with that, and we see it as a way for us to build transparency in the community. We see it as a way to push out information. People may not always understand why we do things, but it is a way for us to push out, here's a critical incident that occurred with our officers. Here's the audio and here's the video. Here's the explanation of the why. I think what we have done a terrible job of doing in the past that we have improved upon is explaining the why to the community that we serve. And that has helped build relationships within our community. We do a critical incident community debriefing video after every officer involved shooting or major incident that explains what happened, and it shows the video from our officers. Sometimes that's great video, sometimes it's not great video. And it humanizes the officers, it humanizes all those that are involved, and it allows us, like I said, to explain the why. And let people digest that and figure out for themselves if that why satisfies the question that they had. I can tell you from a personal experience, we had a officer involved shooting late in December of 2019. I thought I would never experience this as a police officer, but the family reached out and asked to see a copy of the officer's body-worn camera from the shooting. So myself and our PIO sat down with the family and watched the video of the incident. I will be honest with you, I cried, some of the family members cried, and it was a heart-wrenching, traumatic experience. At the end of the day, the mom turned to me and said, I'm sorry for your officers having to go through this. I wish my son would have done what they asked. And I apologize that, no one in this line of work wants to be involved in an officer-involved shooting. But the conversation that we had and the shared understanding that we would have never had when I first started shows some growth in our organization, shows some growth in our profession, but by no means is police work ever going to be a completed book, right? And it's conversations like these with people in our community through Coffee with a Cop or just citizen context that we have that's going to make us better. And it's citizens, to be honest with you, quite frankly, coming forward and attending our police review board meetings and holding us accountable and asking us questions and demanding change that's going to make us better. If we sit silent or the community sits silent or we just stand on opposite sides of the street and yell at each other, none of us are going to get better.
Thank you. And thank you for your transparency. I know that it's something that you were just talking about, but to come out openly and say that it's not perfect, right? When you started so many years ago, that it wasn't perfect then, and it's still a work in progress. I think you nailed it. Transparency is really a way to build trust and relationships and get people to understand one another, right? And obviously to understand law enforcement right now in particular. So thank you. Ari, I'm going to pass this over to you. Same question.
Yes, thank you, Craig and Mary, as well. I think you both had great points with the transparency, and especially the SMART goals, Mary, that you talked about. And at Disney, that's always been what I was taught. I started with Disney, then went into the military, and still now managing both of those careers. So I already had that background, and I'm now bringing even some of that corporate work into the military. So focusing on those two right there, the military as a whole is going more big business. They have a huge retention problem like many people. And how do we fix that? Well, they're starting to get vulnerable. They're starting to ask these questions. What can we do for our people here to make sure they see themselves here, hear themselves here, and feel like they belong? When you feel like you have that, you then can have these conversations. But until you establish that, you don't have it. So I think now to companies, right? We had it with the COVID emails. Look what we're doing for COVID. Now look what we're doing regarding the Black Lives Matter movement and everything. But where's the action? And that's been a lot of the conversation as well, is where is that talking? Unfortunately, with Disney, we had a great panel the other week internally with some of our ABC cast members. Some people may be familiar with Michael Strahan, former Giants defensive player, and now with Good Morning America, huge advocate for all this, and called out the company saying, where is our action? And he said, Bob Iger, I love you. You know, we have a great relationship, but he even called out, you know, now our executive person, chairman, where is our action going? What is going on? So when you start allowing that and you let your company become vulnerable to those conversations, and then opens the doors for people to speak up. So then it empowers others. So now that Michael Strahan spoke out and this panel did, other people now will speak out as well and begin to have that dialogue on what do they need. And I think about companies as well. What's your core values? What's your mission statement? What do you stand for? And if you don't align with what's going on, you can always adjust it. You don't have to stay still on that platform, right? Not always is everything worth a hill dying for, right? Sometimes there are things you need to negotiate and move on from and figure out where do you want to be today and also 5 years from now. And I think about this current move and everything going on, a lot of the talk too is it's great that you're saying things today. Let's keep the momentum. Let's keep this going because we have so much work to do. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And let's connect with our law enforcement, with our education system, with our communities to come together for the greater future. And when you do that with the corporations, with education, with law enforcement, everything else coming together, it will then, when you work together, all the gears will start spinning and you don't have that kind of push and shove and what's this, what's that. And don't be afraid to ask the why. I think that's a huge factor too. Why are we doing it this way? Why is it done this way? Have we thought about this? And learning the history as well is important to understand why we are where today and then where we can project for the future.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Ari. And I love the why. Why? Doing the deep dive behind what you're doing. You know, why are we doing what we're doing? How is it going to make an impact? And Mary, have you mentioned earlier, you know, what's going to be the outcome, right? And really figuring out all those things ahead of time. I want to direct this a little bit with Craig and have this conversation with Craig specifically. You know, there's a lot of misunderstanding that's happening on all sides, and social media is not not helping. The news, the media, those things are not helping. So, and I know that there's been a lot of pressure on law enforcement to make changes. You know, they're talking about, you know, defunding or changing the funding for law enforcement moving forward. Can you give us some insight or shed some light, because we're all about education here? What's already being done? You know, what's happening in regards to training? Is there any proactiveness that's happening when somebody becomes an officer and throughout their service? What are the steps that are already being taken to prevent situations like this?
Well, I think in law enforcement, specifically here in Anaheim, we had a difficult year 12 here in Anaheim. We had some protests and some rioting here in Anaheim, and that stemmed from, I think we had a strong community presence, but we were oftentimes doing a lot of talking and not a lot of listening. And since 2012, specifically Anaheim, we were the first agency in Orange County to implement wearing body-worn cameras for our officers. We have policies that dictate when they're supposed to turn them on, where they're supposed to wear them. You know, they're all supposed to be forward facing. They're supposed to be on before they get to a call. They're supposed to be on while they're at a call. We were also, well, we're still the only police department in Orange County with a citizen-run police review board. We also have an independent agency, the Office of Independent Review, that audits the police department. We send our completed major incident review investigations, which involve critical incidents, mainly officer-involved shootings, to the Office of Independent Review for an independent review of our actions and our investigation into the incident. The Office of Independent Review then writes a yearly report. And typically, I think over the past 8 to 10 years, we've agreed with over 90%, I believe, of their recommendations and made changes within the department, either how we do things procedurally or changing policies. But specifically speaking about law enforcement, from the beginning in the academy, the recruits are taught cultural sensitivity classes, de-escalation classes, And those are from POST, which is the state's governing board for police officers. We believe in that so much here at the Anaheim Police Department that we recently purchased a state-of-the-art training simulator that allows us to put officers in scenario-based training that doesn't always result in the use of a firearm or an impact weapon, because we figured out if you're always training like a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And there's no way to respond differently. So with our simulator, we're able to put officers in scenarios where the outcome is just talking to someone and telling them what you're going to do. And then we walk away, and that's the end of the scenario. And it has really opened the eyes of our officers. We've also invited a number of activists within the city to partake in that training. I will tell you, some of the vocal people within our community that have gone through our training had some interesting reactions when they were put in traumatic situations. And then they looked at us and said, wow, I can't believe I shot. And then I can't believe I shot that many times. And then our training staff looks at them and says, yeah, that was a don't shoot scenario, that our officers will go through and handle with some verbal judo or some de-escalation tactical communication tactics. So I think, and I said it before, and this is a tenet until the day I retire from this job, we will never be a completed book. And that is the beauty of this profession. We are open to input from our community. I will tell you, prior to COVID happening, we have monthly meetings for our police review board that are open to you. The 4 before COVID hit, the 4 months before COVID, there were 0 people in attendance outside of the board. And from, I would encourage those that are within Anaheim that want to get involved and want to look at, like Mary and Ari are talking about, is what is the end game for a corporation, or what is the end game for your actions? Our end game is those meetings being packed and us finding a bigger building to host them, right? That's when we will know that we've been successful in engaging with the community and hearing the community and making the changes that, quite frankly, we need to make, and then the public expects us to make. So I will be excited when the COVID restrictions lift and our police review board meetings are packed and we're in there having meaningful discussions and providing the community with the why for what we do. So I think that's kind of where we're at with the police department and what we're going to be doing moving forward.
Thank you. And if you had a magic wand and you could add something right now, or if you think that there's something more that needs to be done right now, what would you say that would be for you?
We need more community engagement. That's what we need. Like I said, going to our police review board meetings and seeing those meeting rooms empty is disheartening at times. This community is a great community full of a wide variety of ethnicities, races, colors, creeds, everything. We need everyone in there. We need everyone that is taking the time right now to write posts and say they're upset, to direct that energy towards our police review board, because that helps us drive change, right? Because if we're there saying, hey, I think we're doing a good job on this, but our community says, no, I don't think so, then that's where those changes are going to occur. Oftentimes we will hold community meetings after critical incidents and we'll debrief the incident thinking that the questions are going to flood in about that incident. And then the meeting takes a different course of, hey, how come we can't park in this neighborhood? Or how come we don't see police officers driving through this neighborhood? So like I said, we come to a meeting with an idea in our head thinking this is what the community wants to hear. And without that pushback and without that open line of communication, we can't get better, because the community itself knows what it needs and knows what they want from the police department. And at the end of the day, our job is about customer service, and we need to get that input, directed, focused input, not just yelling at each other, and work towards a solution. And then hopefully, in 2 years, a year, 6 months, we've moved on, and we've shown some progress. But I will tell you, there is something in this line of work a year from now that we're going to be doing that me and my colleagues are going to look at each other like, well, why in the heck didn't we think about that 6 months ago? Right? And that's going to come from our community. And that's how we become successful as a police department.
Absolutely. Thank you, Craig. And thank you for sharing that. Ari and Mary, I want to ask you, a similar question. How do we move forward right now? And is there something that we can do now? And I think it's all about, especially for companies and individuals, what's an action step that they can take right now to help move through these difficult conversations, have the conversations, move through them, and really build that action plan. And, we're going to be wrapping up with the panel questions here shortly. So anybody that is joining us, please start thinking about your questions because we will open it up soon. But I'll go ahead and start with Ari, and then we'll end with Mary on this question.
Yeah, I think right now where we are today in this thing is a great start. People who are listening to us talk, and don't be afraid to speak up yourself either in any situation. Find your voice, right? Whatever that may be. If it's behind a social media platform, that's fine, but also show your action behind it. Don't just say the words. And find that community, especially on LinkedIn. There's still a lot flooding in there. Yes, it's more business oriented, but at the same time, it's about life. And I think I love the evolution of LinkedIn during these current movements and matters. I've been able to personally connect and learn from others, see what other companies are doing, see what individuals are doing, corporations are doing, and think, oh, that's a great idea here. Oh, there's something great that I can bring to Disney, I can bring to myself, right? I think to look at yourselves internally here is, where do you feel you can be the most effective? Where are you comfortable? And where are you willing to go a little bit extra to get out of that comfort zone for yourself too? Don't just stay in that bubble. Reach out, find those allies that you can rely on. And if you don't, find a group within your network that you know that you can trust and talk with them there. Figure out, okay, what action plans can I take? And where can I go forward? I think a lot too is read books. I think that's something huge as well. Books always tell a great story, and find the right ones from different philosophers, doctors, people that have talked about these movements, so you can educate yourself. So when you enter the room, you can feel ready to go.
Thank you. Thank you, Ari. Mary.
Yes. So, and I'm thinking about all this and framing it from the educational perspective. So Ari, I love that idea of reading books, but I think one thing that schools and communities, districts, and that organizations can do is to really have a solid recruitment and retention plan for their employees of color. Because what I have seen is, particularly as a principal in failing schools and low socioeconomic schools, is that those are the students and those are the communities that require the most resources and support. So when we do get those employees in, when we do make sure that we're engaging external stakeholders like the police department, like other businesses that can, in your backyard, that can provide resources, what are we doing to create safe spaces where employees can be invited to the table and share decision-making processes? Are we creating a safe place for them to think and act and lead in a way that is befitting of the company, will also move the company forward? But also, how are we recruiting those people into the organization so that they want to stay? I heard a great quote that said, please don't invite me to the party, but ask me not to dance. So if we're at the table, if we're having conversations where our voices are elevated, then that creates an opportunity where I want to stay. The second thing is, I think culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally responsive teaching is important. So when you start to think about, I just don't want to bring up the race conversation or the implicit bias conversation without education, that's again where you deepen the conversation so that you can see growth. And it also helps students, it helps your employees, it helps your companies become better problem solvers. And if you're a problem solver, if you're a solution seeker and you frame it from your experience, but also are able to walk in the shoes or walk in the stilettos of other people who have diverse experiences and diverse perspectives, you become a better human. And a better human can be placed at Disney, a better human can be placed in the Anaheim Police Department, a better human can be placed in front of children and teach them for 7.5 hours a day because they open up those safe spaces. And then the third thing, and I just think this is one of the most fabulous tools, is our organization, Rebrand North Carolina, hosted a Shifting the Conversation that was entitled Woke Has No Color. And in that conversation, we were privileged to have from UNC Chapel Hill, the president of the Moorhead Science Center and Planetarium, and his assistant director. he, a white middle-class man who had come to STEM through all of his schooling, through all of his experiences, his affinity with tech, and she, as an African-American female from a low socioeconomic school that had to fight her way into this space, but they both arrived at the Moorhead Planetarium and Science Center in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and they talked about how they were actively creating spaces in their recruitment of graduates and interns, their recruitment of employees, making sure that the conversations around the planetarium were centered around STEM and around tech in a way that elevated everybody, whether it was culture, their creed, and their ethnicity. But they used the intercultural development inventory, the IDI, and it was amazing because whether there was a student, whether it was a faculty member, whether it was an administrative assistant in the department, it gave everyone one of the 6 stages that said, here is where you're at with cultural competency. Here is where you're at in terms of pointing your moral compass toward these racial injustices. And depending on where they were in those 6 stages, they were able to start changing the policy, they were able to start changing the pedagogy, and they were able to start changing the practice. And it is an ongoing process. So Ari, it is, you're right, it's not it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. But using that IDI continuum, they had people who placed in denial. They had people who placed in minimalization. They had people who placed in acceptance. And based on that, you know what they did? They didn't polarize those different groups. They put them together. Because if you start to look around your circle and you're having the same conversation, you're not growing. So they have been able to intentionally move the needle. So that is a skill, that is an assessment tool, 50 questions, it's about 20 minutes that organizations can use to really start that conversation.
Thank you. Do you mind, we will send everybody an email. So Mary, if you can send that link to me, and then we can send that out to everybody if you're interested in looking into that further. Thank you guys for giving us those action steps that we can take to move forward. One of the things that we also tell our clients in stepping into these conversations is to practice 2 things. The first is setting agreements and having your team set those agreements before the conversation happens. So, you know, putting the ball in the team court and saying, how do you guys want to show up in this conversation, and letting them decide, you know? So we want to show up open-minded. We're not going to talk over one another. We're going to listen with empathy, with no judgment, and letting your team create those agreements. And then being able to show empathy and understanding when they're done. Every single person, whether you agree or not, does not matter. Being able to say, I hear you. Okay, so acknowledging their response, I hear you, we heard you, and then wrapping it up with, thank you for being vulnerable, or a sign of gratitude, thank you for being transparent, thank you for sharing how you really feel. And this can really help, again, create that psychological safety. And this is one action step that you can start today. So I really encourage everyone that's on, if you haven't had that conversation yet with your team members, with your companies, friends, community, start, have it today, have it tomorrow, as soon as you can. So we're gonna, before we wrap up with the panel, we're going to take some questions. And what you can do is you can simply raise your hand. So if you're a participant, you can raise your hand, and then we will allow you to talk and come in. So really simple, you can just click the raise hand button, and then anything that we see will go. Okay, so we see a couple questions, and I'm gonna go ahead and allow you to talk, and we'll just give you a short amount of time if you can get your question out as soon as possible, and then we can take it from here as a panel. So Stephanie, I see you first, so I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Netta. This has been wonderful. My question is for Captain Craig. It sounds like you've been doing some great work within your department. The broader discussion seems to have 2 camps. One camp is the 8 camp, meaning put more money into the police department and demand things like de-escalation and no chokeholds, things like that. And the other camp is defund the police, meaning take the money from the police budget and put it into communities of color and things like that. And I was just wondering where you stand, what you think the answer is, even though your department obviously is doing a really good job, what you think that other departments could benefit from.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, I can't really speak for other departments. I know our chief will be probably later today issuing a community letter in response to some of the 8 can't wait demands. we as a department have looked into President Barack Obama's policing in the 21st century, and some of the examples from PERF, which is the Police Executive Research Forum, some of the guidelines for policing. I spent pretty much all day yesterday looking at those documents and seeing how our department stands up with the recommendations from those documents, as well as the so our chief will bring out a community addressing some of those issues today. I can tell you yesterday we issued a bulletin throughout the department suspending the use of the carotid restraint hold within our department. There are some things that within all those documents I think we agree with as a department. There are some things that we don't agree with, but there's a movement afoot that, like I've said all along, is that's why I love this career. It is a ever changing. There's never a day when I come in that, hey, I'm going to do this and get it done, because something else comes up, right? And that's the beauty of it. And it's for all of law enforcement, I think every department has to look at those objectives and look at those demands and figure out where they play. I will also tell you, as a police department, we are doing more than we ever have, right? We are the homeless advocates. We are the psychiatric emergency response. We have dedicated specialized units for both of those. Our community is woefully underfunded for both of those types of calls. We have woeful underfunding within the school district. We are also the officers that provide security at local schools. So to push back and say, hey, the department needs to do this and the police department needs money taken away from it, in some ways I agree, because our officers are getting pulled in so many different directions and being asked to handle psychiatric calls and mental health calls with absolutely zero prior information on this person's history, this person's diagnosis, and our officers are often forced to make split-second decisions that are then, diagnosed for the better part of years. So I think there are some parts in that movement that I agree with, and there are some parts where I think the cities and the politicians have to take a look at themselves and figure out what they can do better as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Craig. And thank you, Stephanie, for the question. We'll take just a few more here. Araceli Martinez, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Please go ahead and ask your question. Araceli, go ahead and unmute yourself on your end. Okay, it doesn't seem to be working, so we'll choose someone else for right now. Okay, let's see here. Tori Waner, I see you have your hand raised, so I'll go ahead and unmute you. Tori, go ahead.
Hi, first off, thank you guys so much for coming. This has been so beneficial for me. My question is directed toward Miss Mary and then whoever else would like to engage. So in my generation, I'm overwhelmed by the amount of information presented on social media. So what advice do you have when using social media as a resource to help educate ourselves? And what advice do you have when using social media to voice my own perspective?
Absolutely, Tori, I think that's a great question. And I think that you have to become culturally conscious of the things that you let in. You have to decide for yourself, and even I have to do this. Sometimes you have to write down and decide for yourself, what is your use of social media doing for you to make sure that it aligns with your vision, your goals, and your stance on certain things. And then you honestly have to go through Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, all those things that are out there. And you have to say, if the people, the organizations, and the accounts that you're following do not align or kind of skew or distract you from really making sure your social media is purposeful, you have to hit the unfollow button. This is why. There used to be a time where you could get to the bottom of Instagram, where you would scroll and you would hit the bottom and it would say, thanks, you're all caught up. But Tori, as you know, you can scroll for hours now and get lost in the Instagram vortex. And what has happened is I have following 4,000 accounts, 4,000 people. Their ideas, their feelings, their opinions are distracting and eroding what it is that I came to social media for. So if you want to use social media to educate, then you need to go through. And if anybody who's posting pictures of their cat's kittens, and the yarn that their cat's kittens ate for breakfast, that's not helping you as a human being. And right now we have to become culturally conscious because we have so many things coming at us. The news, our notifications are going off, email, people are calling. So you have to protect your ear gate, you have to protect your eye gate, and you have to protect your thumb gate in terms of those things that you're putting out there, those things that you're following, liking, reposting, and retweeting. And once you do that to get alignment, once you do that to make sure that you're growing, and once you do that for enlightenment, you will literally curate your social media. We're all curators of the messages we're putting out and what's coming in, but it just takes a little bit of time to be able to do that.
Thank you. Okay, I love that. So you said, wait, eye gate, ear gate, and thumb gate?
Thumb gate.
Everybody put that down, right? Tweet that. I love that. I mean, you're right. It's consumption overload, right? We talk about it all the time, and it really takes away from the positive inflow, right? The things that we do want to be focusing on. So I love that. Eye gate, ear gate, thumb gate. Beautiful. Beautifully said. Thank you. And Ari, we'll give you that opportunity as well.
Yeah, I just want to add it's great. And I think back to Nada, what you teach about brand management, right? This is your own brand management. That's your own social media platforms. And you can have them be a little bit different too. My Facebook for myself is more about my family, right? I post some things there and there, but I want that to be curated towards my family and certain things. With my LinkedIn, as I was getting involved with diversity inclusion and within the HR field, I started following more of those HR representatives that I connected with, people that I was speaking with, different TED Talks and so forth. And then I noticed my feed changed. So your point, Mary, is when you start following the things that you're interested in and the resources you want to gain, I've gained so much knowledge from that for my personal development, as well as what's currently going on with events and areas that I align with. And I noticed, wow, especially with this Black Lives Matter movement, I align with so many of these people now, and I had no idea how they felt, but we were sharing together. And it's like, great, now I feel even more empowered to speak, especially as an ally, as a white male here. I now can be a stronger ally for those who have always been an ally for me as a veteran. So it just feeds off each other in that aspect and everything, and seeing where those work. And when you notice it doesn't, no one's going to get upset if you unfollow. You can have that conversation on the side, but you want to make sure you're seeing the content that you relate to and comfortable with and understanding where it's coming from.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ari. Appreciate that. All right, we have time for one more question. So let's go. We have a couple more that are popping up. Let's go with Michelle. Michelle, please take the opportunity to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for this. I'm curious, so this is kind of toward Ari. In terms, obviously companies know they need to do something. I'm curious, who are the people that we should contact about? You know, is it the human resources? Is it the owner of the company, the president? Who are the people? I have a company that does leadership training, but who are the people that really care, that won't blow you off?
Great question. Great question, Michelle. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It is really great. And I would kind of point to every company is a little different in how they operate. So at Disney, I'm very fortunate we're empowered. I started in the college program, which is a very famous internship program. I started speaking up then. I'm a very loud mouth. I'll say, hey, this is my ideas and thoughts, and that has helped. And now I'm being put more and more in positions to be able to do that. I would say the biggest thing is finding that mentor and ally that you know has the connections to help. And again, it really depends on the structure. So at Disney, Bob Iger has said, be out there, be vulnerable, go out and talk. So our CEO and now executive chairman person has told us to speak up and go out and have that empowerment. If you don't have that though, and I know not every organization has that structure. I think about the military, right? It's a very hierarchy approach. You go through your chain of command. How I've been vocal there is using the resources in the chain of command. HR is a great resource, of course. We're always gonna have a safe place for you. And I think HR, we've talked a lot as well in how we need to step up even more. This is such a prevalent time for us. And interesting to say, what can they do? What can you go to? So think about in your organizational structure, who are those people that are in the meetings? Is it a steering committee? Is it an executive committee? Who can you get in contact with there and formulate a team and a plan? Don't just go with, hey, this is my idea. Do all the research in advance too. So when you present your idea, say, hey, this is what I want to do, and this is why, and this is how. So you give them all the information. So now they're your voice in the room. And when that happens, so much change can happen too. So I would just say, be vocal, find it out, and then hopefully from there, your change can happen. Now, and don't be afraid of the word no. Find out why there's a no, and then figure out a way around it. Don't let that door close and be closed permanently. Every door can be opened, so find a way to open that door.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ari. And thank you guys for the questions. I know we have a couple more, but we do want to honor your time. So if you have some questions, please send them privately to any of the panelists, and you can also email them to me, and I will be sure I get them to the panelists so that they can answer your question, because we do want to make sure that that happens. Before we wrap up, again, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for having the courage to put yourself out there, sit on this panel, have these conversations that are difficult, that are never easy, but we are really modeling what needs to be done. And thank you for everyone that joined, because you took the first step. You took the first step by joining and educating yourself and being a part of a conversation. And now we really encourage you to take this and take it back into the community, take it back into your household, take it back into the workplace and the companies. We are recording this, so we will send you an email with the recording, and we will be sharing it because we want it to continue to reach people. But thank you guys again. Before we leave, I just want to give you one last quick opportunity to just sum up with one golden nugget, like one last message that is just from your heart or top of mind that you want to share. And then we will say goodbye. Thank you, everyone. Ari, we'll start with you.
Kind of like I said before, this is a marathon. Let's not stop this momentum and having these conversations. Have them with your friends, have them with your family, have them with your coworkers. Learn and educate each other and continue to grow and continue this momentum. The more we have and break down these barriers, the better we'll be for the future.
Thank you, Ari. Mary, we'll go to you.
I think one of the most dangerous phrases in the English language is, this is the way we've always done it. So this is not about a situation of the cards we've been dealt. We need a whole new set of cards. Now it's time to define it. Now it's time to be innovative. Now is the time to put those things into practice and do things in not a new normal, but the now normal.
Thank you, Mary. And lastly, we'll end with Craig.
Well, I will, it's a tenet. I coach a high school sports team, and I tell them all the time, there's 3 things you can do to get better and make everybody better around you. Stop yelling, start reading, and start listening. I think if we all do that collectively, we'll get better. Because listening is the biggest part of that, is we all need to listen to each other. Like I said, seek information and not affirmation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you guys again. And we always like to say, rise up for you so you can help others rise. That's the whole point of this company, is starting to take action within yourself, ownership, and now passing it on into our communities and to our workplaces. So again, thank you guys so much for joining. We really appreciate your time and having this conversation. And everybody that is a participant, that listened, that watched, thank you again for being a part of the conversation. Thank you guys.